folks gave me, you know, the traditional toy train when I was about 4 or 5 years old.
Right.
A Marx toy train.
Yeah.
And then I had a cousin who was in the HO, which was kind of new then. And as he got older, he gave me a couple of cars and locomotives and stuff. And now I've got to the point to where I don't spend very much money on the hobby, because you get to the point to where you just buy something specialized once in a while, which means I usually have to order.
But you're hooked.
Yeah, but you can spend an awful lot of money on something like that. But it's a great hobby because you learn electronics, because you wire. I wired a control panel one time. I went to we had a model railroad club in the Washington DC area, and we were talking about control panels, and a woman walked up to me and says, "I've got to wire a control panel, but this looks too daunting." I said, "It's just like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's one wire at a time." I said, I go down in the basement after 10, 12 hours of working on the Hill, listening to people bitch about their taxes and why they can't get their kid into the university of their choice, spending money and using money. And I go down there and I wire up a few wires, run a few trains, and then I can go to sleep and relax.
It's relaxing.
It's therapy.
It is therapy.
Controlling those mules, you see that line, that rope line that comes all the way up to the head mule? So they hauled that from Death Valley down to Mojave, and it was, you know where Colonel Sanders used to be, where the plaque is? Well, that was about where the 20 mule teams met the railroad, and over behind there on K Street, where there's a garage and a tire shop thing. We moved here in 1948. That was all the barns where the mules, and I tell people that the 20 mule teams, which are the epitome of transportation in those days, were designed, tested, and operated less than a mile where we're designing spaceships. Now that's what the mule skinner used to see, and you can imagine what it smelled like. But and that's the mules. This was for 20 mule team days. Every 3 or 4 years, Rio Tinto hires Bobby to run those mules. And if you during the rest of the time, the wagons sit up there at the visitor center with the largest plastic mules in the world. You used to have, there's a little model kit that a whole bunch of us built back in the day that had the little tiny plastic mules.
1890s?
Yeah, in the 1890s. And they had water. There's a cistern out at Cantil. I remember my dad and I and Glenn Settle and a bunch of us cleared that out. There's a little, for a historical monument called Desert Springs. So that is the old depot in Mojave, and probably around the turn of the last century. It was originally a 2-story station. It had a Harvey house. Do you know what a Harvey house is? That was back in the days before the railroads carried diners. Everybody would come into a town, and everybody would jump off the train, and they'd run in and they'd eat as fast as they could, jump back on the train.
We went to the Harvey House in Kansas City.
There was some woman in Mojave, Florence Tomeyer, who lived across from the Stickle Mortuary. I knew her, who was a Harvey girl, and there's 2 or 3 other women in Mojave who had been Harvey girls. And these poor women had to wear these starched outfits.
Oh, yeah.
You saw that movie, Judy Garland.
I have that movie.
That? No air conditioning.
Yeah.
Now, that is the Owl, and that is a cab-forward, articulated cab-forward locomotive. Probably the most distinctive steam locomotives. You know, Big Boy was interesting, but this is a real... And the Southern Pacific used those for freight and passenger. In fact, most of their passenger trains over Tehachapi Pass were powered by those cab forwards, and they didn't have to double head them. Those are heavy trains. And you see the first few cars are baggage cars full of mail. And they had a Cisco chief at the depot in Mojave. I took that one night, and that is the eastbound chief going to Chicago through Barstow, and you can see the baggage cart there. This is the diner right here, and then the and then the coaches, the high-level coaches. that is the symbol that was on the Southern Pacific. Put the names of their trains on all their cars, and they had at one time 6 different liveries, 6 different paint schemes for the trains, which must have, they finally got down to 1, which because it was costing them a fortune. There is the daylight at Oak Creek Road with 2 GS4 diesel jets and GS6 pounding up that hill, and there's across the street, I Street. And if you're interested in old railroad buildings, drive up and down I Street sometime, because most of those houses were built by the railroad around 100 years ago.
You live in one.
The house I lived in used to be up just this side of there, and it belonged to they had bigger houses for the supervisors. Our house was owned by was used by the signal maintainer. And in the 50s, the railroad got out of the housing business, and Jack Pattenberg, who was the signal maintainer, bought that house and moved over onto H Street and added on to it. Those houses were built out of clear redwood. And I found that out when I decided I was going to cut an electric outlet in my home office, which was one of the bedrooms. Sorry.
Guess who watches Jeopardy?
Yeah. That's Doug Clipperton. He must be back. Anyway, Jack fixed it all up. But anyway, I was going to cut this little outlet, space for an outlet. Well, I got my sheetrock knife. I hit the sheetrock, and it just, after about the 3rd time, I drilled some holes and cut out a chunk of clear redwood. And one of my neighbors in I Street had the same thing happen when the Sears guy came around to install an air conditioner.
Oh,
So really well built, and they're built with dimensional nails. They all had 10-foot ceilings. Our house has been dropped down. It is about as well insulated with the double ceiling and the stucco and everything and the sheetrock. This is the coast daylight. I used this picture to show you. I didn't have a color picture of the San Joaquin daylight. And the only difference between the 2 trains is that the San Joaquin daylight had a railway mail car, an RPO, railway post office, right between the locomotive and that combine. The Southern Pacific was about the only, well, the Southern Pacific and the Burlington had articulated passenger cars. In other words, they'd have 2 car bodies on 3 trucks. And then they had these diners where they'd have 3 car bodies, a diner, a coffee shop, and a kitchen car on 3 car bodies on 4 trucks. And the Lark trains and the Cascade trains, there was a lounge car, a dining car, and a kitchen dormitory car, because it was an overnight train, and the cooks got to sleep. And people were more interested in booze than they were in steaks at that time of night. But it was a beautiful train, and some people have called it the most beautiful train in the West. And the Coast Daylight and the Coast Starlight, which is now Amtrak's probably the best train in the country, everybody says, runs up the coast, and you have that beautiful view. And of course, the other problem they have with trains running south of LA to San Diego, they go by some beaches, and some of the young people who frequent those beaches occasionally moon the people on the Amtrak and coaster trains that go by there. So it's this is the cab of a cab forward. I mean, of a daylight locomotive. Now you guys are all familiar with aircraft cockpits. Well, that's a cockpit of the best form. You know, human beings never traveled faster than a horse until somebody invented a steam engine. I think his name was Watt. So that's what the engineer was on the right side. The fireman was on the left side, and those seats were just a wooden box with a little padding in them. And of course, there's no air conditioning on that locomotive, except the windows. And there was in those locomotives, they had a little hatch in the top, which is apparently open for the light. And you can't see the throttle; it's on the right. But it was kind of interesting. Those engines, the Southern Pacific converted to oil early on because there was more oil than coal out here. So the firemen didn't have to shovel coal. But the railroad did build a locomotive back in the coal days called El Gobernador, the governor, because the big 4, the Stanford and I can't remember all of them, who, Crocker, Hopkins, right. We got one more and you win grand prize. Anyway, Leland Stanford was the governor of California. Anyway, there's a picture of it on the wall down by Mike's Restaurant now, on the Gardner's building. And it was a 412-2 or something like that. It was built for helper service over at Tehachapi. The only problem is, even with 2 firemen, they couldn't keep it steamed. That train actually came through here, if you were around here in the 50s, and you remember the big snowstorms in the Midwest, where they actually had to, the Air Force had to fly hay, Operation Hay Lift, to the cattle between California and the, over the Rocky Mountains. And that train actually was, all the trains over Donner Summit were diverted through here. The city of San Francisco, the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific premier passenger train over Donner Summit got stuck in the snow for 3 or 4 days.
Wow.
And they had to rescue the people. But I remember seeing that train coming through here. I'll have to tell you, that is one of the nicest trains I ever rode. It was all dome cars and just a really beautiful train, operated by the Western Pacific, the Rio Grande, and the Burlington.
It looks like one of the ones you painted.
Yeah, I did. This is a baggage car, which is now in the Tehachapi Railroad Museum, Tehachapi Depot. It belongs to the Mojave Transportation Museum. It's on semi-permanent loan until we get a museum built. And it's been used, and when they first put it up there, one of the people up there said, well, that's just going to take up room. And it wasn't too long after that, I went to an event up there, and that same person was using it as for all the food.
The buffet car.
Yeah, the buffet cart.
Yeah.
And there's an old suitcase up there that came from the Golden Queen Mine. Lutz Klingman found it out there, and it's got a bunch of old maps and stuff in it.
Cool.
The 2 pictures on the wall, the picture at the left is of the French TGV, which my wife and I rode from Paris to Rennes on the Normandy coast, and the other one is a picture of Tehachapi, of the Tehachapi Loop. This is, we do get passenger trains through Mojave every once in a while, even though we're on a regular Amtrak route. That is the Coast Starlight. About every year or so, they'll do some track work on the coastline, and they'll run that train through here. Now, those 2 cars on the back are 2 dome cars that used to run. They were built for the Western Pacific, California Zephyr. And that observation car was probably one of the best observation cars ever built anywhere in the world. They belong to private people, and they lease them out, and you can, if you want to afford it, if you can afford it, you can ride those. But you can see the little sign over there that Al built on the right, the Welcome to Mojave, just going west towards Tehachapi. And they'll run that through here 2 or 3 times. You can't get on it. In fact, you can only get on it in Los Angeles and I think maybe Fresno and Oakland. But it's a beautiful train. That's the train coming the other direction, and that's shooting. And if you want to see something interesting, go up to up above the Oak Creek crossing, and then take a picture coming back down with a telephoto lens as tight as you can get it, and you will see that grade. There it is. You can see a little bit of it right there. See, the town is higher.
They used to call it coming into the bowl, didn't they?
Yeah, it's kind of like a
WL.
bowl.
Yeah.
That's why they didn't, the railroad yard, Mojave railroads have what they call a hump yard. They kick the cars loose and they roll down and they stop them with retarders. That's where they sort the cars out. Well, they had an automatic one here in Mojave, naturally built, and on more than one occasion a car got loose, and in one case went all the way to Acton.
Oh my.
And the yardmaster on duty lost 30 days paid for that.
Oh my God.
Now that's another Amtrak Coast Starlight, and that business car in the back, that's a business car that's used by the president of Amtrak, who now has a new business car. I don't have a picture of it, but it's one of their semi-high level cars. But that's the same train. I love that car. Those are beautiful cars. Now here's we get Union Pacific business trains and Union Pacific and BNSF business trains coming through here. The railroads run these from time to time. They'll have a bunch of shippers, and I know once in a while they'll run a train through here where they have all of their mechanical people on the train to inspect the route. And that usually has one of the big Centennial locomotives on the front of it. But those E8 locomotives built by General Motors were Union Pacific. I got to tell you, had the most beautiful ones in the world, and we got to thank the Union Pacific for still doing that, because it gives us rail buffs something to look at besides, you know, I look at of Amtrak on train orders, and I get so bloody tired of looking at Amtrak. Back in the day, every railroad had its own colors. SP had 6 different liveries, and it was a little bit more interesting. But the Union Pacific still has those locomotives. They take care of them in their shop in Cheyenne, and we appreciate that. That's the Santa Fe business train.
Wow.
That's an old dome car. And you see the back end of it. That's what's called a theater car. Most railroads have that now, including UP. That's just south of the overpass at the south end of town. The seats on that, and I've got to ride in one of those cars one time, a couple of years ago. The seats are on a slope like a theater.
Huh.
And you can see out there, and the railroads use those for inspection. I got to ride it because there's a proposal to lengthen the sidings on Tehachapi Pass to improve capacity, and so they had a thing where they took some of us local folks over to Bakersfield and back, and that is the way to see. And at the end of when it was all over, they gave us a video of the whole trip.
Wow.
And you notice railroads are getting a high tech. That's a radar dome of some sort, of communication dome on the top of that car. And that's the theater. That's the Union Pacific business train from the other end. And that first car, since locomotives these days don't carry steam, the trains were always heated by steam, heated and cooled. Now it's all electric, and that first car is a power car. And occasionally you'll see the circus train come through Mojave. In fact, it will be going to the circus train every year, and I don't understand this from a logistics point of view, comes through here 3 times. They come through here from the east, they go to Fresno, then they go back to LA, and then they go back from LA up north. And it seems very inefficient to me. Now, I like to go out like you do and take pictures of trains. There's a lady on the circus train taking my picture, and her daughter there. And that's about a 60-car train. That is one of the longest passenger trains you'll ever see. And it's a rolling museum of 1950s railroad, the best railroad cars ever built before the modern day. Most of them from the Union Pacific. You can tell by the corrugations on the sign. Most of them built by the Budd Company. The first cars are old old Union Pacific baggage cars, and those are the animals, the elephants, and once in a while you'll go by and you'll see the doors open. And I want to tell you, as a rail fan, don't stand too close to a Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey freight train, especially the head end of it, because I was doing that one day, and the guy inside there kicked a bunch of manure-covered hay out. He didn't hit me with it, but it was interesting.
Is that based out of Florida?
Yeah, they're based down in Florida.
Boy, that's
They have 2 trains. They have the red train and the blue train. That year, I don't know, I think it's the red train this year they switched. Now that's kind of symbolizes the Southern Pacific, or the Union Pacific did something recently, or a few years ago, and they called these their heritage locomotives. They are made up of about 4 or 5 former railroads: Southern Pacific, Missouri Pacific, and the Western Pacific. And so they paint these locomotives. This is the one that represents the Southern Pacific, and the number is the year they absorbed the Southern Pacific Railroad. And that locomotive comes through here, as do the others from time to time. And that's just up, I guess that's just south of town.
That's
Now that shows, this is just a bunch of Union Pacific locomotives parked in the yard down here. This is major mountain railroading going over this hill, folks. You'll see the newest and most powerful locomotives anywhere in the world in Mojave and going over Tehachapi Pass, because that is a pull. And the trains that go up, I got to ride up to Trona one time. Or we didn't go all the way to Trona, we went to Cyril's station where we drop off. They haul coal up there to run the mills at Trona, and they bring product out. We had to cut the coal train in half, leave half of it at Cantil, and then take the other half, and we went up that grade up over 395, and these were brand new locomotives, 5 miles an hour. And as we pulled up to the railroad crossing, I could see some idiot trying to decide whether he should try to beat the train, because his car was kind of jiggling. I finally wisely decided not to. And you usually see locomotives on the head end, sometimes swing helpers in the middle, and the engines on the rear. There's nobody in those other locomotives. It's all controlled by from the engineer in the cab electronically. The cabs of diesel locomotives are now like airplanes. They're flat panels, and it's all very high tech. Everything's a computer screen. And that locomotive that I can't remember, it was in the 100 series that we took up to Trona. It was one of the first flat panel locomotives.
Bill, do you have pictures of when they were lowering the track and making the
I do, but I don't have them here. What they do,
I
this
have
is,
them too.
yeah, between Mojave and Bakersfield, it's almost all welded rail, and it's all concrete ties. Again, that is the most modern track in the world.
And watching them do that, oh, that was fabulous.
Oh, they've got this equipment that just does it automatically, and if you ever get a chance to see it,
Oh, it's just,
don't stand downwind because the dust will kill you. But
yeah.
this little locomotive from a Florida railroad called the Apalachicola Northern was shown in the yard. It is now on this airport, painted bright red. It belongs to Progress Rail Services. And occasionally when you're going on the airport, you'll hear this whistle and say, hey, that's coming from here. It should be coming from there. And you'll come up to the railroad crossing and you have to wait for a little train to go across there hauling the cars in and out. This is Ron Wright, the late Ron Wright. Ron and his wife Midge. Midge is working out selling stuff. The lady who's selling stuff out at her apartment. They have the steak mill up here north of town. Ron was an O-gauger, and he had a really wonderful collection. This was up at the Tehachapi Loop Model Railroad Club in the old Vets building. Guys having a show up there. He was just one of the most wonderful people in the world.
He was great.
And he loved trains, and he loved people and kids, and he had the greatest. I can see the trains from my house a little bit because I'm about a block from the yard on 8th Street. But Ron and Midge have got the best view. In fact, we've got this underground telegraph. When a train comes through Mojave, I'll call Doug Pickard or somebody, and once in a while they'll call me, and especially when they had the hobby shop, it was really kind of neat. So we grab our cameras and run out there. Now, once in a while, this is a group from Bakersfield, live steamers in Mojave Park at one of the last gold rushes we had, and that's operating. It's not steam. It's not diesel either. It's probably gasoline, but had a lot of fun. This kind of symbolizes the two major industries in Mojave. This locomotive is on the branch to, well, the Lone Pine branch is what it's officially called because it originally went to Lone Pine. And of course the airplanes are parked out there. So that's Mojave is air and space and trains. That's why we had Train Crazy Saturday. This is something that people like to complain about. This is the Trona Trolley. That is a major operation, folks, that supports several hundred jobs up at Trona. And this is a car, I think they're taking empties up. That's the rear end of the train. And occasionally, maybe twice a day, you'll have to wait for that. And if we ever get the money, we'd like to put an overpass there, but I don't think we'll get it for 2 trains a day. But it supports a major industry and is vital. They ship that stuff out of the port of Los Angeles, like borax and boron. In fact, U.S. Borax is Rio Tinto owns the only private docks at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. All the other docks down there are owned by the ports, but Rio Tinto's got their own because they ship most of their stuff out of boron. By the way, at Borax, if you get out there and you wander around a little bit, they have one of these remote-controlled diesels, a little switcher where it's controlled from the ground. You'll notice that the windows are all reflective, so you can't see anybody in the cab because there's nobody up there. Now, this is a Mojave Airport locomotive, and the guy that was in the picture is Al Hansen sitting there. That's there. Al and Cathy own a little Shea live steamer, and we had a kind of a Train Crazy a few years ago and set some track up here, and I think that's Mike Massey back there in the hat. It takes about an hour to fire up one of those things. But there's Mike. Yeah, Mike is sitting in it was a lot of fun. So there's a lot of people, railroading has one of the biggest fan bases of any industry that I've ever known of. And some of the railroads appreciate that, and some of them don't. And you know, it takes people to operate trains, and here's a guy inspecting the tracks, and they do that a lot with pickups now, high rails. And my wife and I watched a video last night of the Alaska Railroad, and that's really fun.
We rode on that, it's great.
Okay, now I'm going to come to my spiel on high-speed rail. This is high-speed rail in 1938. And I rode that train between Bakersfield and Fresno and Hanford. The Santa Fe Golden Gate. It was the first generation of high-speed Budd-built aluminum passenger trains that used to run up to 110 miles an hour between Bakersfield and Hanford. And the irony of this is that the biggest objections to high-speed rail in California are coming from people who live in Kings County and Hanford. And they don't understand that they had that going through there, you know, back in the 40s. In fact, I think I may have ridden that train before I was born.
Wait a second.
On a pass too, by the way. Anyway, that was high-speed rail, and the reason that the California high-speed rail is being built initially in that area is that is some of the straightest rail in the United States. If any of you remember the old Railroad magazine, once a year they used to run a speed table in there showing all the fastest pieces of track in the country. That area between Corcoran and Bakersfield was on it, and the area between Mojave and Lancaster was on it. Because I've seen the San Joaquin Daylight hauling whatchamacallit between here and that's almost completely straight once you get past Rosamond. This is high-speed rail, and this is not new high-speed rail. This was shot in the Gare Montparnasse in Paris, and so we took the train down to Rennes, which is on the Normandy coast, and it's an interesting little town. And apparently, I ate some what I thought was beef, and which a French lady on the airplane back to the United States told me was probably horse meat, because I got ill.
Oh.
And anyway, it was an interesting experience. But since they were running so few trains because of the strike, my wife went back to the restroom, and there was a Frenchman sitting on the floor outside the men's restroom saying, "I pay to ride the fast train, and I have to sit in the restroom."
Oh dear.
People were sitting in, that's the French. Anyway, that's my take on railroading. And by the way, I keep telling people when they talk about high-speed rail in California, 2 years after it's completed, you'll all be asking, why in the hell didn't we do that before? Because it is beating airlines on trips up to 300 miles all over the world. You can get on the train without having to have somebody shine a light up your backside, and it's just a much more civilized way to, you can get up and walk around, you can eat a halfway decent meal, and do all kinds of things. Anyway, thank you.
My brother joined the National Guard and rode on one of those trains, and I was so worried about him because it was during Korea. And I remember asking my mother if he was going to die, if he was going to war. And she assured me that he was not, that he was going to be in the Ohio National Guard and working on airplanes right in our state. And he turned out he was a crew chief on P-51s. But I still love trains, and I always remember that black steam engine with the smoke coming out. And so Daddy knew I loved trains, so when we came to California, he says, "I'll get you a ride on a train." And at the time we lived at Edwards, so he brought me to Mojave. And I thought Mojave was wonderful. Gosh, it just had everything. It had trains and airplanes and trucks, all the stuff I liked. So anyway, he takes me to the train yard, and they put me up in the cab of this train, and I started to cry. And the engineer and Daddy saying, what's the matter? Well, it's not a steam train. It was a diesel. But anyway, I got to ride in the yard in a diesel train, but I always wanted to ride in a steam train. And since then, we've done that. We've ridden on the Cumbries and Toltec and the steam train up in Ely, and the one in Virginia City. I actually got to ride
The one in
in
Ely
the,
is the Nevada Northern.
yeah.
I've been watching.
My name is Doug Pickard,
Okay.
Pickard. I live
Okay,
in
Doug.
Tehachapi, lived there
Yes.
20 years.
Yeah.
Very interested in toy trains, they call these, not model railroading, because this particular size is more of a toy.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I've been very active in the Tehachapi Loop Railroad Club and also active with the Friends of the Tehachapi Depot, our museum up there. And I built this layout 12 or 13 years ago specifically for this purpose, to bring to a one-day show or something to keep the public interest in model railroading and toy trains.
So you built it to show it off at
Yes.
public gatherings like this one here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, how nice.
And it breaks down into pieces. They're fairly lightweight. I do have to have a trailer to haul them on, but
Yeah.
it only takes 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes at the most to set this up and have it running.
Uh-huh.
So it works good.
So it's
for the event.
convenient, yeah, for sure.
I do have another larger layout, much more intricate and with a lot more things on it. That I do have another layout that I bring to shows, but time-wise it doesn't work to bring it to a one-day show.
Uh-huh, I see.
We will have it. We do have a show probably 3 times a year in Tehachapi for a weekend, both Saturday and Sunday.
Uh-huh.
So when I'm available, I bring both of these layouts to that show.
What time of year is that
Well,
take
there'll
place?
be one on the 3rd of August.
Uh-huh.
Will be our next show. Then I think we usually do one in November to set off the Christmas season.
I got it.
And then we do one in the spring sometime. I think
Sure.
we did it in April.
Okay.